Good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan. Thank you for joining our live interactive telephone town hall this evening. We are hosting tonight's event to give Congresswoman Spanberger the opportunity to hear directly from you and answer your questions about the issues facing Virginia's families, seniors, and economy. As I mentioned, this event is an interactive forum. Congresswoman Spanberger will be taking as many questions as she possibly can live during the event. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your phone's keypad at any time. Again, *3 on your phone's keypad to get in line to ask a question. You'll then speak to a member of our staff. They'll take down your name and where you're calling from. And the next time you hear your name, you'll be live on the call and you'll be able to ask your question directly to the Congresswoman. You can also ask a question by submitting one through the portal below our online streaming player at spanberger.house.gov. Again, that's spanberger.house.gov/live. If you are watching on Facebook Live tonight and wish to ask the Congresswoman a question, we encourage you to visit that online streaming portal so you can submit your question. Additionally, if you would like to receive updates from our office via email, please press *6. That's *6 on your phone keypad at any time, and an operator will collect your email address for the updates. We might receive a lot of questions during this event, so if we're not able to address your question, please call our district office at 804-401-4110 during normal business hours. Again, if you have any questions throughout the event, please press *3 on your phone's keypad or just type them below the streaming player. Now, please welcome Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Abigail Spanberger, and I am so proud to represent Virginia's 7th District in the U.S. House of Representatives. I hope everyone on the line tonight is having a great week so far. And for those of you who are new to the 7th District, I want to welcome you to the conversation. These virtual town hall events are opportunities for me to update you all on my work for Virginia. It's my opportunity to hear your feedback and concerns and to discuss some of the priority issues that I'm working on Capitol Hill and back home in Virginia's 7th District. By dialing out to thousands of constituents, we are able to meet you where you are, and I hope that you are having a relaxing evening at home as you join us for this telephone town hall. So we've made some exciting progress for Virginia over the last month. At the end of December, the president signed into law my bipartisan legislation, the Summer Barrow Prevention, Treatment, and Recovery Act. This bill addresses the record rates of overdose we are seeing in Virginia and across the country. Our law will provide more than $900 million in funding to provide hope to those struggling with addiction and, most importantly, resources for those struggling, resources for first responders on the ground, and support to recovery programs that are shown to get results. Additionally, to address the sharp increase in fentanyl-related deaths across our communities, the president signed into law my Securing America's Borders Against Fentanyl Act. He signed that into law last month. This law presses the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to get serious about boosting our detection of fentanyl capabilities at our ports of entry along the southern border and at all ports of entry. As a former federal agent and as a former CIA officer who worked narcotics cases and tracked some transnational criminal organizations, I am deeply concerned about the dangers presented by fentanyl across our communities in Virginia. This is a step in the right direction. I also want to make sure that everyone is aware of the constituent services that my office can provide. If you are having issues with a federal agency, the VA, Social Security, Medicare, our office can work with you to help find a resolution. Since taking office back in 2019, we've helped Virginians receive more than $27 million in backlog tax refunds and benefits they were owed. If you or a loved one needs assistance, please go to spanberger.house.gov to get in touch with us, or connect with our office over the phone at 202-225-2815. We're here to serve you and look forward to hearing from you if you do need help. Once again, it's absolutely an honor to serve the people of Virginia's 7th District in Congress. Thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us for this conversation. And with that, I look forward to taking your questions.
All right. As a reminder, press *3, that is *3 to get in line to ask a question. It looks like we have a few people in line to ask a question. So next, we're going to go to Ronald's online question. He asks, is Social Security and Medicare at risk?
Well, thank you for asking this question. The question is Social Security at risk? Is Medicare at risk? The answer is not if I have anything to do with it. For those who have been following some aspects of the news, I do have colleagues on the other side of the aisle who, in the interest of cutting federal spending, are talking about cutting some of our most important programs. That includes Social Security, that includes Medicare. So there are real risks in that there are individuals who do want to make cuts to these vital programs that that people have paid into, like Social Security, that it are benefits that working people have paid into, expecting them to be there when they retire. But the reality is that I will not let that happen, and I think that there is absolutely the important consensus, certainly among the majority of folks in the House of Representatives, that we are not going to do anything that would hurt Social Security or Medicare, and certainly a bill that does such a thing would not be brought forth in the Senate. So at this point, I will continue to do everything necessary and possible to protect these vital programs. But there are some in the halls of Congress who do wish to make significant changes that would indeed drastically decrease or hurt these benefits. But I am working against that because these are vital, vital programs.
Okay, thank you so much for that question, Ron. Next, we're going to go on the phone. We have a question from Jesse in Woodbridge. HIPAA question. Jesse, you are live with the Congresswoman. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, Congressman. Yes, Congressman. This is Jesse Madgett. How are you? My question is, what can we do? What can we do to improve our HIPAA laws so that it doesn't, so that it does more to protect Virginians in this era of cybersecurity attacks?
So that's a very interesting question, Jesse, and certainly the question being, what can we do to address our HIPAA laws to ensure greater privacy? So first and foremost, I would say I recognize the cybersecurity threats that exist, and in fact, I passed into law a legislation called the Better Cybercrimes Metric Act. And this legislation is a vital piece of legislation. It was signed into law, a bipartisan piece of legislation, because frankly, there is a shortcoming in our system for law enforcement agencies, local, state, and federal, to be able to coordinate their efforts to fight back against cyber attacks, cyber crime, phishing attacks, identity theft, and similar such uses of the internet to commit crimes and steal personal data. And so this piece of legislation is incredibly important. And one of the primary drivers about this related to protecting healthcare data. Separately, though, there is a real need to modernize HIPAA overall. Frankly, it's, one could say readily that it is out of date, and certainly out of sync with some of the new applications and the data that is collected. So I think two things. One, on the protection side, we've taken a good step in the right direction with the Better Cybercrimes Metric legislation that we passed into law. But you raise a really excellent point in terms of overall modernization of HIPAA. And so I have voted to modernize HIPAA's information sharing about substance use disorder data, but this is one small subset of overall reforms that need to be reviewed. So protecting information is one piece of it, but then what information is included is another. The first one, we're doing some strong work, and certainly the second one, in terms of modernizing the data, Jesse, I'll continue to dig into that one because you've brought forth a good question and one that we should be looking at.
Yes, thank you, Jesse. All right. Well, we're just getting into this event. If you'd like to get in line to ask a question, that's *3 on your phone's keypad. If you'd like to stay up to date, Congresswoman's e-newsletter, email, *6 on your phone's keypad. You'll be connected and give your email. That way you'll be up to date on the happenings in Virginia. All right, next we're going to go to Lorraine, a question about debt. Lorraine, you are live. Go ahead.
Yes, Congressman, I'm very concerned about how far in debt our country is. What are your thoughts on decreasing some of that debt?
Lorraine, thank you for this question. Certainly, the discussion of debt is one that is front and center right now as we contend with the debt ceiling and a potential debt crisis. And certainly, I know that it has been in the news lately, but basically, the question is, are we, the United States of America, going to pay our debts, or are we potentially going to default? Right now, it's incredibly important that Congress take action to ensure that we don't default, to ensure that we do pay our debts. That's necessary to maintain the full faith and credit of the United States. That is vitally important, really, to every single American, and certainly important to Virginia's economy, and the constituents that I represent. That's one piece. But then, Lorraine, you brought up the issue of the debt overall, and what are we doing about the fact that our nation continues to have substantial debt, and what are we doing to address our deficit? Well, notably, over the past 2 years, we have brought down the deficit by approximately $1.7 trillion, a step in the right direction. Certainly more needs to be done. And we have to have earnest conversations about what it is that we are spending our money on. This comes through the regular appropriations process as we go through program by program assessments of what it is that we are spending our taxpayer dollars on. I am a strong supporter of oversight of the dollars that we are spending, and in fact, just last month passed into law legislation that will require substantial and earnest oversight of the support that we are sending to our Ukrainian partners. And so it is incredibly important that every member of Congress be attuned to and focused on the fiscal health of our country. And I am certainly supportive of ongoing and regular conversations about the fiscal choices that we are making. But in the public sphere of late has been discussions about just full percentage cuts to our outlays, be it to Social Security, to Medicare, or to defense spending. And I don't think that just percentage cuts off the top is a responsible way for us to address the challenges of considering what investments we are or are not making, and the dollars that we are or are not spending.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. Next, we are going to go to Lewis. Lewis has a question. Well, he's from Woodbridge as well, and a question about Speaker McCarthy. Go ahead. You are live, Lewis.
Yes. Well, thank you for having this, first of all, Congressman Spanberger. I really appreciate that. What's the Democrats' plan? Because I know you guys are really starting to work together, and I'm very proud of that. What is your plan to hold Kevin McCarthy accountable and keep him from going after frivolous charges after Joe Biden and impeachment and all this extreme right-wing agenda? What's the plan? Because if there's no plan, then we're going to waste another 2 years of getting absolutely nothing done, and I find that unacceptable as a veteran.
Well, Lewis, thank you for this question. I think that what we see, the answer to how it is that we are going to ensure that we're doing right by the American people and actually focusing on things that, frankly, people talk to me about day to day. They talk to me about across the campaign trail, and they continue to write in, call in, or discuss with my office. And that's the impact of inflation on families. That's real challenges that our service members and our veterans are facing. That's issues that matter locally across the 11 localities of the 7th District. And certainly there has been some hyper-partisanship, and the now Speaker has engaged in that from time to time. But where I find a bit of positivity, and where I look to as a kind of antidote to that, is the fact that there are also a lot of people who are focused on finding common ground and getting things done. And so even at a point in time right now where we are facing the real challenge of how do we contend with the debt ceiling, how do we ensure that the United States actually pays its debts, and that we continue to have our standing of full faith and credit, and we don't jeopardize our economic or our national security, there are folks on both sides of the aisle, regardless of what the new speaker says, that want to protect the American economic system and that want to ensure that we are protecting the fiscal health and the national security of our country. And as it continues on issues that do matter, certainly across the 7th District and across the rest of the country, those issues are lowering the costs at the pharmacy counter, lowering the costs in the grocery store, recognizing that families are facing challenges across the board, and we need to be legislating and governing on the issues that matter related to mental health, the substance use disorder crisis, the list goes on and on. And so to get back to your question, when we do have someone, and at this time, oftentimes Speaker McCarthy, who is talking in hyper-partisan terms, frankly, some of his own colleagues on his side of the aisle are the ones who are kind of pulling back. At least some of them are from distractions that are keeping us from focusing on the issues that matter to the people of Virginia. Thank you, Louis, for the question.
Thank you, Louis, for that. Yeah. Next, we're going to go to Roberta. Roberta has a question about gun legislation. Roberta, you are live with the Congresswoman. Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you for having me, Congresswoman. My question is concerning school shootings and just people getting shot in general, which is terrible since there was 3 in California just in the past couple of days. Is there any legislative proposals to bring back the ban on the purchase of assault weapons? When it was passed previously, there was, according to the facts I can find, 1 shooting using an assault weapon. But now that the ban is off, that has risen tremendously. And to be honest, I find it very inappropriate that after January 6th, our Congresspeople have more physical protection than our school children. I've got grandchildren. I'm a former teacher. And again, I'm hoping somebody is going to propose some legislation that's going to end this terrible, terrible, terrible crime.
Yeah. So, Roberta, thank you for this question. You touched on a couple different issues. And first, I want to thank you for the time that you spent in a classroom. Thank you for teaching children. Thank you for being there for children. Thank you for wanting to protect children. And I am a mother of 3 school-age children, 1 in elementary school, 1 in middle school, and 1 in high school. And so I am on the receiving end of the emails when there's lock and hide drills at school. And I know even what those drills do, and the fear that they can instill in my own children. And certainly here in Virginia, we know the horrors of gun violence, of mass shootings. And you mentioned specifically what is routinely called the assault weapons ban, but that piece of legislation was a production stoppage. It was in place from 1994 to 2004. And during that time, it had the data were clear that with fewer assault-style weapons available, mass shootings decreased, with a cap on magazine capacity, which was another element of that legislation. We know that there were lower rates of fatalities when there were shootings. And of course, the violence didn't stop because of this one piece of legislation. And that wasn't the expectation, but the data were clear that this legislation, the assault weapons ban that had previously been in place for 10 years, did reduce the number of deaths or the lethality of particular shootings. In Congress last year, we voted on a renewed version of this assault weapons ban. And we also voted on legislation that would have limited the magazine capacity that one can have. And for those who aren't gun owners or who aren't sportsmen or who aren't maybe familiar with the terminology, the magazine capacity is how many rounds of ammunition a firearm can shoot. And I began my career as a federal agent. And when I began my career as a federal agent, I had a magazine that was marked for law enforcement use only, because this was during the time that 1994 law was in place, and it limited the magazine capacity for non-law enforcement personnel. And we had larger magazines because of a work-related necessity. But what that means, and we know it's borne out time and time again, that when there are capacity limits, or frankly, when a shooter needs to stop and reload a firearm, that presents an opportunity for Good Samaritans, for individuals to either engage or to flee. We know that in the Parkland shooting, there was a group of students who were able to escape down a staircase because the shooter stopped to reload. The larger the magazine, the less often that occurs. I know it's graphic and dark to talk in those terms, but in other mass shootings, when the shooter has stopped to reload, that's the point in time when Good Samaritans have been able to tackle, and there's specific examples of that. We passed the updated version of the assault weapons ban, which again is actually a production stoppage. So those who have already purchased certain firearms would be able to keep them. They would fall under the National Firearms Act per this legislation. It passed with bipartisan support in the House. We could not get it to a vote in the Senate. Limiting magazine capacity passed within the United States House with bipartisan support. We could not move it to a vote in the United States Senate. I, as a former federal agent, somebody who carried a firearm every day in that capacity, as a CIA officer who continued to train with firearms, as somebody who grew up in a house with firearms, this is really clearly a discussion of how we as Americans demonstrate a responsibility towards firearms that are in our communities, that are in our homes. And so I am a co-sponsor, and right now in the new Congress, we're now reintroducing pieces of legislation. So I will once again be a co-sponsor of that updated assault weapons ban. But I will say, Roberta, we did have real movement forward the first time that we had passed any meaningful gun violence prevention legislation was the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. We passed that bill. It was signed into law. So it went through the House, went through the Senate. Just in the title, it's bipartisan, and legislation in there related to addressing elements of the issue. Some funding towards mental health, some funding towards first responders, some funding and some acknowledgement towards the benefit of what are commonly known as red flag laws or extreme risk protective orders, changes to ensuring that victims of domestic violence can be protected. But it's a step in the right direction. I'm proud of that success, but there is yet more work to be done. And so I look forward to having continued conversations with constituents about this issue. And I certainly thank you for raising it tonight, Regina. Or Roberta, excuse me, Roberta.
That's right. Yeah, okay, next let's go to Jay. It isn't the first time the word fentanyl has come up on the call, but it's an important topic. So Jay, you have a question. You are live with the Congresswoman.
Thank you. I think I got in a little late, but I did hear mention of fentanyl, and I wanted to thank you so much for being open to communicating with your constituents like this. But so I was hoping you would elaborate on what you shared related to fentanyl and how that is affecting the community and our world. Also, and then I also had a question about related to household, the difference in household, maintaining a household budget compared to the requirements in maintaining the budget of the USA. I have a deep interest in politics and social economic stuff like that, and it always tickles me when I hear so much talk about where people will compare what's happening in their household budget and the way it's handled. And they compare it as if the USA, the funding and financing and running of the USA would operate under the same principles. So if you would speak, I appreciate it. And
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. I appreciate it. So Jay, you had two questions, pretty different. So I'll go back to the issue of fentanyl. And in the beginning, I mentioned this in my introduction, but I'll revisit it because it is such an important issue. Since I was first elected in 2019, though some of the communities on the line are new to the 7th District, so I am your new representative. I was first elected in 2018 and first sworn in 2019. And so since I first began my time representing Virginia's 7th District in Congress, I have heard consistently from families who have lost loved ones to fentanyl overdoses, to family members and those in recovery who worry deeply about fentanyl-laced drugs and the lethality that exists because of fentanyl-laced drugs. I have talked to first responders, police officers, EMS professionals who time and time again are responding to overdose calls that are increasingly or have increasingly become fatal because of fentanyl-laced drugs. This includes fentanyl-laced cocaine, fentanyl-laced counterfeit pain pills, and the lethality of these drugs is significant because fentanyl is so deadly. So I have taken two actions that I'm going to highlight because these are the two that have become law. One is addressing the real prevention of these deaths. So it's the Summer Barrow Prevention, Treatment, and Recovery Act. It is named for a young woman who lost her life. She became addicted to opiates after being prescribed painkillers by a doctor as a result of an accident, and she became addicted. Through her drug addiction, she ultimately died of an overdose from a drug that was laced with fentanyl. And so sadly, her story is the story of so many other families. The loss of her life is the story of the loss of so many other lives. And so really to recognize the human side of this loss, the Summer Barrow Prevention, Treatment, and Recovery Act provides more than $900 million in federal funding to proven federal grant programs that support prevention, treatment, and recovery. So support to our first responders who are first on the scene, support to jail diversion programs for those in recovery so they're getting the resources and recovery resources that they need, support to efforts to ensure that in emergency rooms, doctors are well aware of and prescribing alternatives to the opioids that so many individuals have become addicted to. And even just in the past few weeks, SAMHSA has announced application for $80 million that the Summer Barrow Prevention, Treatment, and Recovery Act has made available. And so what that means is counties across the 7th District, community organizations across the 7th District, and the rest of the country can begin applying for these funds as they do the great work on the ground of trying to protect our communities. And so that's what we do. That's addressing the issue of once fentanyl is here in the community, but we also have to stop it from coming in. And the challenge that exists as it relates to fentanyl is such small quantities of fentanyl can be so incredibly deadly. And so what we know is that efforts to interdict fentanyl at our ports of entry need to be better, absolutely need to be better. And when I was a federal agent, I worked narcotics cases. When I was a CIA officer, I worked narco trafficking and transnational criminal organization related cases. So the impact of what is occurring outside of our country, transnational criminal organizations pushing fentanyl across our borders and then it comes home into our communities and has proven to be so deadly. So second piece of legislation that I would want to highlight would be Securing America's Borders Against Fentanyl Act. This is a bipartisan piece of legislation. The president signed it into law last month that is really pushing Department of Homeland Security to do more. The challenge is real because of how easy it is to conceal fentanyl because of the high potency, that a small amount can be so deadly. But no excuses. We need to stop this drug from coming through our ports of entry, and that means ensuring that they have the ability, and that's from funding, resources, and requirements, that they are able to really up their capacity and the technologies that they use to ensure that they are interdicting fentanyl when it comes to the southern border. So thank you for asking the question about that. And then Jay asked a question related to kind of the comparisons. Many people are making the comparisons about what it's like to have a household budget, what it's like to have the federal budget. And I have heard people say that, and I think some of the comparisons might be correct. We have to pay our debts. The United States of America has to pay our debts, right? Ideally, if you got your budget at home, you are paying your credit cards, you are paying your rent, you are paying your mortgage. So in the very general sense, yes, one can make that comparison. If we do not pay our debts as a country, we face catastrophic, decades-long impact on all federal programs, impact on our ability as a nation to borrow, that's impact on you and me and people across the United States, and what the value of the dollars in our bank accounts, or the values of our homes, or the values of kind of everything around us. And at a point in time when we are still contending with inflation, we cannot risk defaulting on our debt as a nation. There is no sort of, page turn that you can get past it. It is an absolute catastrophic crisis if we default on our debts. As it relates to the budgeting and what we're spending on, if you want to make the comparison, and I think that Jay's point was it is apples to oranges, so I'll agree with Jay, it is apples to oranges, but if you do want to make the comparison, there are certain things that we absolutely must fund. We have to fund our national security. We have to fund our military, the more than 250,000 service members and civilian employees of the Department of Defense that are just in Virginia. We have to fund the maintenance of our roads and bridges. We have to fund the very function of our nation. And so, yes, we should. And this was asked a question earlier by Lorraine as well. Yes, we have to have very earnest conversations about the money that we're spending. But we know that also in Congress, we have made some good choices. In the first 2 years of the Biden administration, we've had more than $1 trillion in deficit reduction, which is a tremendously positive step in the right direction. And we've passed the Inflation Reduction Act. It has hundreds of millions of dollars in deficit reduction over a 10-year period of time, while also paying for that legislation and the savings that it brings to seniors. So, Jay, I appreciate the conversation. I could continue the conversation about the comparisons, the differences for far too long. So I'll stop there. I'll thank you for the question, and I'll move on to the next one.
All right. And as a reminder, press *3 if you'd like to get in line to ask a question, and *6 on your phone's keypad if you would like to speak with a representative of the Congresswoman's office to give your email so that you can stay updated on the latest happenings in Congress. All right. Next, it seems we're going to Leslie, and Leslie has a question. Well, former federal government official looks like, so I'll just let Leslie speak to the Congresswoman. Go ahead, Leslie.
Good evening, Representative Spanberger. My name is Leslie. I retired from the federal government with 43 years, 8 months, and 27 days on 31 December. And speaking of budget, I was told that it could be 90 days before I see 60 to 70% of my annuity. Well, I still have bills to pay. I don't understand why the process takes so long.
Uh, Leslie, thank you for this question. And I'm going to highlight two things. This is a question, unfortunately, that we have heard from constituents far too often. So I will say, I want to make sure that our team has your contact information. We can follow up with you, walk you through the process. I do know that it can be a challenging process as they go through the process of determining what your annuity should be, where you are based on the calculation of your high three, et cetera. I know that does not make it any easier on you, Leslie, but I do want to assure you that we can walk you through the process and be there to make sure that it does not need to take, or does not take even a day longer than it should. So we'll have someone from our team follow up with you directly about that question. And just a reminder to everybody else on the line, any issues you might be having with a federal agency, OPM, IRS, Medicare, et cetera, please be in touch with our office, the VA. We can provide constituent services and help you with questions that you may have, like Leslie's. And thank you for your
Thank you,
tremendous
Leslie.
federal service.
Yes, absolutely. Years. Okay, Tracy from Culpeper. Question about inflation. Tracy, you are live. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman. My question is about inflation. This past year in Culpeper County, I know that our properties were assessed. Therefore, all of them appraised higher because of the current housing market. So we're paying higher property taxes now. In addition, a lot of people in this county have to commute for work. So the fluctuation in the gas prices and the groceries is really taking a toll and having, the average working person having to dig into their 401ks or their IRAs or just any bit of savings that they have, in addition to racking up credit card debt. So my question is, what is being done to kind of put a cap on that so that it doesn't bankrupt your average working person?
So, Tracy, thank you for this question. And certainly inflation has been felt across the board at the pharmacy counter and the grocery store. And certainly we have seen the ebbs and flows at the gas pump. Among the things that we have taken action on is working to lower the cost of prescription drugs. One of the pieces of legislation that I voted for and that is signed into law, the Inflation Reduction Act, takes direct aim at the cost of some of the most expensive prescription drugs by giving Medicare the ability to negotiate some of the most expensive prescription drugs. And that competition is valuable certainly to those who get their medication through Medicare, but the larger market as well. Specific to Medicare, but recognizing the challenges that people face in retirement, particularly if they might be on a fixed income. We have capped insulin prices at $35 per month. And for those who might require preventative health services such as a shingles vaccine, that is now free. So as an aside, anyone who might be on Medicare, please be aware that you can now get the shingles vaccine for free. In addition to that, as we look at some of the challenges that we're facing within the grocery store, the cost of eggs, this is an issue that's broadly related to the avian flu, bird flu that has killed just thousands upon thousands of chickens, and that has had impact on the supply chain. We're still contending with supply chain disruptions, frankly, from COVID. And so among the actions that I've taken in that space is related to meat in particular is in Virginia, we're impacted by the fact that we have a vibrant and wonderful agricultural community. I represent many livestock producers, but we need to have access to more local processors. So that's you've got your producer, your farmer who is a livestock producer. You need the middleman getting that animal to the grocery store, processing that meat along the way. There's been so much consolidation. It is harder for smaller Virginia producers. And so I led legislation called the Butcher Block Act that the Secretary of Agriculture has actually implemented administratively. We're still continuing to work to ensure that it is law into the future to provide support to local communities that want to expand their local processing capacity. This is great for the producer, but Tracy, it's also really important for the consumer at the grocery store because that competition is valuable for the prices that we pay at the grocery store. And then one other thing related to one of the root causes of inflation are the supply chain disruptions that we're having and that we have had since COVID. An element of that is the fact that we have a shortage of truck drivers, and our truck driver shortage is only going to get worse into the future, and that has caused major impact on the price of goods. So I have legislation that would help incentivize individuals to come to that workforce through refundable tax credits, and for drivers who are already in the trucking workforce to stay there. That's bipartisan, and we continue to push for that legislation because we absolutely need to address right now and into the future the fact that this vital workforce is certainly currently behind the numbers that we need, and it's an aging workforce, and year by year we expect to have a greater shortage of truck drivers if we don't take aggressive action to address it.
All right, thank you so much, Tracy. Next, we're going to go to an online question here. We have Susanna. A question about Ukraine. I'll read it for her since it was submitted online. What can be done to ensure continued support for Ukraine, Congresswoman?
Susanna, thank you for this question related to continued support for Ukraine. Certainly, among the things that we have to continue doing is talking about why it's important. The United States of America has been a valuable partner to Ukraine as we, from the very beginning of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the unprovoked war that Russia has waged against Ukraine, the atrocities and murder of civilians, the abuses of civilians as they've waged that war. The United States has been a tremendous partner in bringing together our fellow partners, NATO partners, and other allied countries in imposing sanctions on Russia, in providing support to Ukraine, lethal aid and non-lethal aid, healthcare-related aid, communications-related aid, and that work has been vital. We see that the Ukrainians are doing extraordinary work as they continue to fight for their own democracy and their own freedom, and it's incredibly important that we help them by giving them the tools that they need. As they're doing the fighting, we're giving them some of the tools. And it's not just us, it's partners throughout the world who are doing that as well. And certainly we've seen advancements recently with the announcement that the U.S. will be sending Abrams, and the Germans and will be authorizing and sending, and the Polish partners will be sending Leopards as well. Those are tanks necessary in Ukraine. So I'm going to continue talking about it. This fight for their democracy, our ability to support our partners, is vital to them. It's also vital to our own national security that there not be a warring Russia that walks away from its attack on Ukraine, that walks away from the murder of civilians and thinks that they can do it again. The minute they cross over into NATO territory, that becomes a whole different level of responsibility for the United States. And then we are obligated to engage with our own service members. So ensuring that Ukraine can win this war before it gets to another border is in our own national security interest. Also demonstrating, as we look at China kind of constantly being on increasing some of its aggressive movements towards Taiwan, demonstrating that partners, nations the world over, with the United States demonstrating leadership, will stand up for and support democratic nations that want to be free from aggression. And so Russia is watching, Iran is watching, other adversary nations, and China is watching other adversary nations. They're watching the way it is that we are supporting Ukraine. And so it's vitally important that we continue our support. And the Ukrainians are making great use of it. We see them just doing absolutely tremendous, brave work as they try to keep their people safe and fight for their own freedom. And just one note, because we are providing substantial support in terms of equipment, in terms of dollars. And so it's important to note that just last month, the president signed into law legislation that I led related to ensuring oversight of the dollars that we are spending, and accountability for the dollars that we are sending, and the resources and equipment that we are sending to Ukraine. So I'm going to continue to be vocal in supporting our Ukrainian partners, and certainly the results of their ability to continue to fight for their own freedom, I think is proof enough that we need to continue that work and continue to support them.
Okay. Thank you so much for that question. Next, we're going to go to Janin, Fredericksburg City. Janin, you are live. Go ahead with your question.
Hello, Congresswoman. Thank you for your service and for all that you're doing for us. I had a question about mental health providers. I know we talk a lot about the teacher crisis, but I also feel like we have a mental health provider crisis. And though I hear about increased funding going toward mental health, I haven't heard as much about how we are going to encourage people to go into the mental health field. We just don't have enough providers. So I was wondering if you had any suggestions or legislation that's already happening.
Well, thank you so much for this question. And I was just in Fredericksburg at a variety of different meetings talking about this very issue, talking about the challenges individuals, families, schools are facing as it relates to mental health and ensuring they can provide ample services. But there's also a workforce shortage. There's also a real challenge there. So there's a couple things that we can do. We need to improve the mental health workforce, and we can do that by improving the reimbursements, so that certainly there's the salary kind of commensurate with the work that is put in, so that reimbursements for the care that is given is able to keep a facility open and keep the salaries paid. And so there's a piece of legislation that I'd like to highlight that would allow for licensed professional counselors to bill Medicare for mental health services, and within the Medicare program. And so what that would do is it would allow therapists who are at CSBs and particularly also in rural health settings to be able to bill Medicare. And so allowing licensed mental health professionals to, and frankly, adding to the number of people who can bill Medicare, that adds to the financial stability of rural health providers and community services board. So that bill actually passed into law. I was a co-sponsor of it. It passed at the very end of the year and was signed into law, and that should have impact. And if I can get you additional information about what we expect to see as the kind of downstream impact, but allowing additional counselors to bill Medicare ultimately allows for greater financial stability of the rural healthcare providers or the community services board. And then I mentioned in response to an earlier question, the Bipartisan Savers Community Act. And so that's the bill that, broadly speaking, contends with gun violence prevention related legislation and bills that are now law, but it also has nearly $100 million over 4 years for pediatric mental health care access, because we know that there is just simply not enough in terms of a workforce within pediatric mental health. And so ensuring that the funding is there for their training and their kind of pathway ultimately to the profession is important. And already, so that legislation was signed into law last year, but we do know that in 2022, the Virginia Department of Health received about $300,000 as part of that program. Kind of to wrap it all up, because I think I went on a couple different details. Essentially, the workforce challenge is yet another challenge in our ability to confront the mental health crisis. Long-term, having available reimbursements through the Medicare program for providers will provide greater stability to community services boards, to rural health and mental health, behavioral health providers. But we also need to ensure that primary care professionals, and particularly for children, have the ability to provide mental health services or behavioral health services as well. And so the two things that I would highlight that are done already would be related to the Medicare billing, and then certainly support to additional training and support for pediatric primary care providers who need the ability to provide behavioral health services to their patients.
All right, we're going to go next to Odie. Sorry if we mispronounced that. You have a question about infrastructure. You are live. Go ahead.
Thank you. And Representative Spanberger, thanks for saying yes and for your service. My question does deal with largely Interstate 95 that a lot of politicians paid attention to after last year's snowstorm and the debacle that we saw unfold in front of our eyes. I'd argue that that's probably a debacle that was decades in the making. The snowstorm highlighted the fact that for the majority of the Mid-Atlantic, there is one primary thoroughfare that carries incredible volumes of traffic, both local and interstate, from Washington to Richmond. And again, the snowstorm highlighted the challenge of what can happen when that primary artery becomes blocked. And right now, there are no good alternatives for throughput to support that. You know, as you look at a map, you have 81 out in the mountains and 95 along the coast. Secondary roads provide the alternative, but because of traffic lights and all the local traffic on those, we saw the complete corridor between Washington and Fredericksburg shut down because of a snowstorm. And there really are no good alternatives, but I'm not suggesting we need to build more roads. We just, even the thought of being more innovative with the current roads we have, using AI to better time traffic lights during special situations and others. So at the end of the day, this is more than just a problem for the 7th District of Virginia, but a regional problem. But you sit in the middle of it, and so I'm curious to what your thoughts are on that, because you were fairly critical of the situation that happened on 95 last year that locked up a partner in crime of yours, Senator Tim Kaine. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So I think most people remember how stunning it was to see 95 shut down. You mentioned I-81, and actually just a couple of years ago, there was a similar shutdown on I-81 also because of extreme weather. Not to use a pun, but really it was a perfect storm with what we experienced last year, where it had been so warm, and there were certainly warnings that the weather was going to turn quickly, but then it had rained, so even using salt on the highways would not have had the desired impact because it had been pouring. Like, all of these things came together, but the reality is all of these things came together once, created this consequential issue as 95 shut down for more than 24 hours. And, unfortunately, we have to prepare for the next possible time that something so catastrophic could occur. It is an economic priority that 95 runs smoothly. It is certainly a national security priority. And so I would point to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, a piece of legislation that we passed into law that makes hundreds of billions of dollars in investment in transportation. And that's roads and bridges, physical infrastructure, to make sure that we're looking at roadways that are easily passable, that are in the best conditions, because if and when these circumstances occur, we need the risks to be mitigated. So having bridges in poor condition is yet another complicating factor that can create a challenge and make these situations much, much worse. And related to this, though, is our emergency response. And so I was very critical of what had occurred, but more so really aggressive in wanting to make sure that we had an after-action report that fully understood what happened, so that we could plan and mitigate against certain circumstances in the future. And that's everything from communication of emergency services across the state, communication between those who might be directing traffic, communication to create detours so that folks who might flow off of 95 know where they actually can continue their path or their journey on some of the side roads. And you know, VDOT engage. I would say I was just out at the Stafford County Sheriff's Department last week and had a tremendous visit. We talked about a whole host of things. But one of the things that I found to be most notable that they were, and this exists in other places throughout along the 95 corridor and up further north, so into Prince William and then into Fairfax and beyond outside of the 7th, was the presence of VDOT professionals co-located with some of the first responders, so that in the event that there are needs to kind of divert roadways or redirect traffic, that ability to coordinate, cooperate, and inform decisions exists. So certainly our localities are doing a lot of things right, and we need to make sure that the state is doing things right, communicating well, but ultimately that federal dollars are available for the improvements necessary. And so that's the part that I have been able to play in this, is making sure those federal dollars have been available for us to improve our roadways and the resiliency of our systems. In this case, we talked about the road catastrophe that we saw in Virginia, but of course it was just in recent history that we saw within Texas a complete shutdown of the electrical grid during freezing temperatures. And so also part of this infrastructure bill is support to modernizing our electrical grid and ensuring resiliency, not just to extreme weather events such as what we saw in Texas, but also to mitigate against potential threats of bad actors who might try and hack into a system or cause it harm. So thank you for this question, and certainly anyone who has spent a bit of time stuck on 95, not moving, shudders at the thought of doing that for a full 24 hours.
Okay, next we have in the queue Brenda Caroline. Question about internet broadband network service. Go ahead, Brenda, you are live.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Spanberger, for your able performance in Congress, and we are so glad to have you representing us here in Caroline, the whole county. And my question is concerning the availability of broadband. It continues to be a problem here. We live 4 miles from Route 1, 15 miles from Fredericksburg, and 35 miles from Richmond, but yet our internet service is just non-existent. I pay each month for satellite internet, and it is extremely difficult. It rarely works. And my grandchildren who live in southern Spotsylvania, during the shutdown for COVID, were totally unable to do their work from home. And it just continues to be a problem. And it also affects property values. If you go to sell a home and people find out you don't have reliable, fast internet service, that leads them to disregard you. And I just want to know what can we do to get service to every American?
Brenda, thank you for this question. And Caroline County is new to the 7th District, and I am new to you as a representative, but I promise you broadband connectivity is not new to me as an issue. Since I was first elected and sworn in 2019, I have been working issues of broadband connectivity because I have always represented rural communities that essentially fall into these holes where suburbs or towns or cities nearby have broadband, but particular localities or parts of counties in what has become essentially like a Swiss cheese map of broadband connectivity, we have holes. I was proud of the fact that I have worked on legislation and got legislation passed related to the FCC mapping. One of the biggest issues is that there haven't been historically good maps that show where there is a lack of broadband access. And so for people on the line who might be listening and say, I'm not sure what Brenda's talking about, my internet's great. Literally within the 7th District, there are communities where you cannot call a service provider and have your internet hooked up. It is just not possible. It just doesn't exist in certain neighborhoods or certain areas of counties. And so people have to rely on satellite. They have to rely on other resources, which are either prohibitively expensive or in many cases, don't work depending upon the weather, or certainly cannot sustain any sort of working from home or any sort of business related efforts, or even just the regular potential, want to check your email. So this is a really serious issue because it matters from an economic standpoint. It creates major divisions for communities, and it harms communities that don't have the same access as others. In the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we made substantial investments with the focus and the intent of making sure that every community across the United States has access to broadband connectivity. So these are federal funds that can be leveraged throughout the country, state by state, community by community, in order to have that connectivity. But within this issue that is a nationwide issue, Virginia is really ahead of the curve. The prior administration, the gubernatorial administration, Governor Northam, was wholly committed to connecting communities. And through the VADI program, which is a state-based program, the former governor allocated tens of millions of dollars to this program, allocated American Rescue Plan dollars to this program, and expedited the trajectory that Virginia's on towards the goal of having every community connected. This program continues, and it continues to be a goal for Virginia to get to every community connected to the internet. That funding is through the VADI program, through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and I am proud of the fact that I have voted time and time again to support the pursuit of connected communities through federal dollars. We are not there yet, Brenda. I know that we are not there, but I will tell you what, we have made tremendous progress even since I was first sworn in 2019. Over the years that I've been in office, I have been delighted to celebrate across a variety of different communities the many steps they've taken in the right direction, the state grants and the investments that are made. It doesn't make you feel better in Caroline, but I promise you, Brenda, we are moving in the right direction. And if you want to follow up with any additional specific conversations related to Caroline, I'm happy to do so because this is such an issue that's of the utmost importance.
All right. Well, as that was the last question, I have some housekeeping that I could certainly share, but I'd like to pass that over to the Congresswoman just for some closing remarks, and then I'll wrap it up with some housekeeping.
Thank you to everyone who's joined us today. I am so grateful for the opportunity to speak to you. This is your office on Capitol Hill, the office of the 7th District of Virginia. I am proud to serve everyone. I am grateful for the conversation that we have had and the topics that have been so varied. throughout the evening. I just want to let everyone know, those who might be new to the 7th District, that we like to do these dial-out telephone town halls. We dialed out to approximately 100,000 people this evening. Not everybody joined to listen in, but to make sure that we're reaching out to people where you are. I love to do events across the community. I love to meet constituents face to face, but I also want to make sure that in a district as large as ours, more than 3,000 square miles, that I am making my answers to your questions accessible to you, that I am making our constituent services accessible to you. So while we will be and are out about across our 11 localities, I also want to make sure that we are calling you at your home. We're being available to you so that you can get some of the questions asked and frankly hear some of the questions from our neighbors here in Virginia. One final reminder, again, if anyone has any challenges with a federal agency, we can be of support through our constituent services. Please give us a call. Also, if you want to keep track of the things that I'm working on and that our team is working on, please sign up for our newsletter. If you go to spanberger.house.gov, so the government website, you can sign up for our newsletter. We send one at the end of every week that give you updates about what's happening across the district and on Capitol Hill, the legislation that I've been working on, and the visits across the district. And I hope you'll find it interesting, so I hope you'll sign up and keep informed that way. Look forward to hearing from you all in the future. If you have any challenges, any issues, any concerns, please do call us. And I look forward to hearing from you all in the future. Again, thank you for the honor of representing you in the halls of Congress. I truly appreciate it. And I am so proud to represent you in the 7th District of Virginia.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. And just as a reminder, that phone number is 804-401-4110. It's available during normal business hours, or of course, you can communicate via spanberger.house.gov. Thank you for joining us tonight for this Virginia-focused telephone town hall with Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. We appreciate the opportunity to answer your questions, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the week.